Welcome back, gang, and this is part 3 of our Chapter 12 lecture series. This section is entitled Black and White Abolitionism. The focus question for this section is, how did abolitionism challenge barriers to racial equality and free speech? Black abolitionists often played a leading role in the anti-slavery movement. Probably the most prominent and most famous in this period was Frederick Douglass, the gentleman you see right here. He also, like Garrison, published an abolitionist newspaper, and he was a very profound and dynamic public speaker that captivated audiences, not only in the United States, but in Europe as well. Another one was Josiah Henson, who was a former enslaved African American who wrote an autobiography which directly inspired Harriet Beecher Stowe's famous novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, which gave abolitionism a powerful human appeal. The book Uncle Tom's Cabin was one of the most successful books in its time, and it definitely acted as a profound social commentary that had a direct influence on the debates over slavery itself. In fact, there was a famous incident where Abraham Lincoln met Harriet Beecher Stowe and made a comment, and I'm paraphrasing here, to the effect of, "Oh, so you're the little woman that started this war." That's how significant that particular novel was in inflaming the debates and the rhetoric surrounding anti-slavery and abolitionism. It greatly spread the abolitionist message in the North and, of course, prompted an even greater Southern defense of the institution of slavery. Now, as we discussed a few sections ago regarding the racism inherent in the colonization movement, racism was also still very much present within the abolitionist movement itself, even among some of the militant abolitionists. But many people were able to rise above such prejudices to a remarkable degree. Black abolitionists developed an understanding of freedom that extended beyond most of their white contemporaries and directly attacked the pseudoscientific arguments for black inferiority. And this diagram you see here was a part of a publication that was meant to promote these sort of pseudoscientific racial theories. And particularly gentlemen like Frederick Douglass, who was obviously a very intelligent and dynamic individual, directly flew in the face of such pseudoscientific arguments that argued for the base animal nature of African Americans. Black abolitionist rhetoric was even more damning to the United States as a whole than their white counterparts. Black abolitionists claimed the United States failed to live up to its own ideals and reinvigorated those very ideals themselves. They created alternatives to patriotic celebrations like July 4th, which to them celebrated this failure to live up to American ideals. And in particular, they celebrated Juneteenth, which has very recently reemerged in American consciousness just this past year. June 19th was the date of emancipation in the British colonies, and African Americans in this period grabbed a hold of this date and this movement to commemorate and used it as a sort of protest against the failure of the United States to live up to its ideals, as was represented in patriotic celebrations like the 4th of July. And in fact, Frederick Douglass, one of his more famous speeches that really encapsulated this idea was "What to the slave is the 4th of July," a very powerful speech that still resonates very deeply in American society today. Abolition in this period did face substantial backlash and resistance, not just from the South, but in the North as well. At first, abolition aroused violent hostility for some Northerners who were led by gentlemen of property and standing, as they signed some of their messages in some of the newspapers and petitions going around at the time. These were Northern merchants with close commercial ties to the South and the cotton economy. Mobs in the North attacked abolitionist meetings and even occasionally killed abolitionist speakers and supporters. This issue became so toxic and volatile in the eyes of many that the House of Representatives actually adopted a gag rule, which was put in place to prohibit even the consideration of any sort of abolitionist bill or law. Now, the sorts of mob attacks and violence that occurred in the North actually bolstered abolitionist appeal with many Northerners who saw this violence as generally upsetting to the social order. The abolitionists could convince Northerners that slavery endangered democratic liberties of white Americans, and they elevated the idea of freedom of speech and of the press, and the right to petition the government to a central place in their ideology. That concludes part 3 of our Chapter 12 lecture series. As always, study hard, and I'll see you soon.